Everybody. Oh, there you go. My name's Simon Collins, I'm going to be the moderator for the next couple of hours, and I'm going to start by telling you I'm the dumbest person in the room. Really, I am. It's not a joke. I'm so dumb, in fact, that I stole that line from a student at Parsons where I used to work. And the reason I can confidently claim to be the dumbest person in the room is because I can learn from all of you, which for me is great. So I feel good about being the dumbest person in the room, and I shall spend the next 2 hours proving that. We're going to hear from some really smart people, but what we're not going to do is we're not going to sit there and we're going to just listen to them. That's not going to happen because that'll be really boring. So what we're going to do is you're all going to talk. I'm going to encourage you, I'm going to implore you to raise your hand or just blurt out whatever's on your mind as we're talking. Because if this isn't an actual conversation, then no one really benefits. So please do me a favor of actually speaking during the presentations. Don't wait for the end to ask a question. Get stuck in. And I know we've probably got a microphone because we're live streaming this. Hello, Mum. But don't worry too much about that because we can always repeat the question if you ask it. So, don't be formal. Don't sit there quietly. If you want to use your phone and tweet and stuff like that, that's great. But don't let that get in the way of actually being part of the conversation. Remember, because I said earlier on, it's all your fault. So we're going to talk about transparency, right? And our good friends at H&M, when they asked me to do this, were kind enough to give me some slides. That's my plausible deniability because I don't make slides like this. But this says, who made my clothes? And it's the Fashion Transparency Index. Now, when we were talking about this, when they first asked me to do it, I have some personal feelings about transparency in fashion because I live in a country where they don't really care, which is really tragic, right? And I wish they did care, but they don't. They just don't. And you can tell them to care, and then you just, like I said earlier this morning, then you get Trump. So I think there's the conversation is actually slightly different to the one that's on the page, which is, is transparency important? Not to everybody, no. So for me, the question is more, why do we need transparency, and what do we do about that transparency? But anyway, we'll come to that as we go through. So, of course, lots of very, very wonderful people do care about transparency, as they should. I mean, listen, everyone should care about transparency, but not everyone does. So here you can see the Clean Clothes campaign, which writes about fashion and transparency, and then these incredible NGOs which do just work that I don't know, shakes me up. Like when I don't watch horror films and things like that because I don't need to, because I can watch the news and can see enough horror. And these are the people that go and take care of it. So, and that's not really related to fashion particularly, apart from they also care about the rights of the people that work in the fashion industry. So it is all wrapped up together. I thought that those of you that were in this room this morning who saw the presentation from the gentleman from H&M talked about climate change and scarcity of resources and the implications that has on global migration, etc. So it's all wrapped up together. Fashion plays a big role in that, for better and for worse. Government. So right, hands up who thinks government's going to solve this. I mean, that doesn't mean government should get out of the way, because there are some very good governments doing some very noble things, and that's a good thing. And you can see the flags of some of the governments that are taking good actions here. And the European Union is helping. I smirk because England's fucked that up rather, haven't we? But the European Union's doing amazing things, and thank goodness. So that's, these are all good things we can get behind, but this is not going to be the solution. So anyway, they are taking good steps. And then there are a lot of brands that are doing some very fine and noble things. I'm intrigued by this because, going back to my original point, I don't know if people really care. I mean, we all do. But if we just talk to ourselves, it's not going to change anything. It's not going to help anything. So, but these companies are doing some great things, and it's wonderful to see that. I personally wish they'd talk a bit more about it. This is a wonderful thing that we're at right now, and H&M are doing sterling work, really, really amazing. I don't know how much they're telling people around the world about it, though. And I can't help thinking we're not going to get anyone else to join the movement if we don't tell them about it. I used to work for one of these companies, which is towards the top left. And we used to make a lot of hoodies. And some of the hoodies we made out of recycled bottles, fleece, which was great. But we never told anybody. And that was the corporate way of doing it. And it was what it was. And it was great that we were using it. But I felt like we could have got somewhere if we told people about it. So we have some key questions. about so H&M did a customer survey, which I think is really interesting, and I haven't watched the contents of it, and I'm intrigued to see them, and I shall have something to say about it. But these are the most important general factors to drive a positive sustainability perception, because that's what Americans are thinking about when they go shopping in the shopping mall. They are values that reflect my own personal ones. They are clear and transparent about how they do business. They're a company I trust. Their clothes are of high quality. See, I have to feel like that's like consulting company speak. Like, that's not really saying, I don't think any consumer ever said any of those things. I think that's a nice way of wrapping them up into a way that perhaps we can digest in a conference situation. But to me, that's not going to, none of that's tweetable. By which I mean, you know, people might not read it. Anyway, but it's true. I mean, it's true, but you know, you can be the judge of that. The good news is I don't talk for very long, then the smart people take over. So I think we have videos now, so let's watch the videos and see what consumers say.
We get so much information all the time, and it's hard to know what to trust and what is actually true.
I think it's important to see when you buy a top where the money comes from and see who made it and see the overall picture and not like a price tag and a top and that's it. So you can see what the company actually does and how it comes to the store and actually ends up in your wardrobe.
The companies today they have a vision of what they're trying to do and what they want to do, but in order to truly be believed in, I think they have to be more concrete and also share something about what is not going very well.
I guess during, like what we talked about, it should be like easy in the stores to see where it's produced. So it should be like on the label and very clear. So kind of like in the retail environment.
So for me, it's the whole process. It's before I'm thinking, when I'm thinking, okay, I need this or I need this product. So before I'm actually thinking of doing the purchase.
So it's more important, if you want your customers to know, it's more important how and where you communicate.
Yeah.
So if it's in the financial statements or in a sustainability report, very few people are going to read it. But if it's in the store or in the online store, it's more likely that you're going to get your message across.
During the sales, absolutely. I think that's really important to know what am I actually buying and not just this is any top.
I don't want to go into the website and read about something. I want it maybe in my Instagram flow, maybe in a video in the store or online or something. So it's really, really, really simple and easy.
They could be attached to the label. Maybe there could be like a barcode that you can scan for your phone. So maybe you decide that you like a product and then you just want to know if it's like sustainable.
Yeah.
So then you find out that it is or that it isn't, and that will help you make your final choice.
It's like I look at that and I think the question is not what can we tell them about the product when they're sitting in the store, but the question to me is how can we make them care about what's written on the label on the product? Because everyone already knows these terrible things are happening, so people could do something about it already, but they're choosing not to. So I'm not sure, to me this is part of the question, but to me it's much bigger than simply branding goods and being transparent about our production. Anyway, one way of telling people about what happens during that production process and being transparent is to give them the opportunity to look at the factory. And there's a rather clever way of doing that, which you're about to see a demonstration of, which is a virtual reality glimpse inside a factory. So we do need a volunteer from the audience. So who would like to volunteer? And if no one volunteers, oh, good, okay. Thank you. If you'd like to step forward. What's your name? Hannah? Yeah. Brilliant. Hello, Hannah. Welcome. This gentleman here is going to put something on your head, so please assume the position. Has anyone used one of these things before? Yeah. And what do people think? I mean, beyond a sort of fun gaming experience, has anyone done anything constructive with it? So presumably the point of this is that people would care so much about the transparency of the process that they'd want to get a VR system and have a look around the factory. I mean, I think it seems like it'd be a great thing for people in the industry. You know, like if you're an inspector, that seems like a really solid thing you'd want to do, like a surprise inspection of the factory. But it's not live in real time, is it?
There's a lot of unlabeled chemicals here. And really uncomfortable chairs.
No natural light. Anyone got any comments on this? I mean, I'm sort of politely intrigued. Anyone think this is going to be helpful? If it can be real timed, yeah.
You can't tell from pictures or a video whether it's a swatch up or not. They all look the same whether they're compliant or not.
Yeah, you can't see what's upstairs or downstairs either.
Now there's what really interesting union.
Hmm?
You can't tell when they're getting paid.
Yeah. But I mean, as part of the monitoring process, presumably there's some benefit to this. I mean, my concern is that this is interesting, but if this becomes a big focus and something else that actually would appeal to people on the ground is not a focus, then we've lost sight of the need that's there. Any more comments on this, on VR? The use of? We know VR is really important. We know it's coming. Yes.
Well, I mean, I think one of the benefits is that it educates, hopefully, consumers as to what a factory does look like. And then, you know, it's a continuum of action, right? So where do we intervene to lead to the changes we want to see? This, I think, is additive, albeit not the solution.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, and if you can do something, see, to me, if you can do something interesting that's slightly fun, then maybe you can get kids to engage with it, and maybe they can tell their parents, and maybe, you know, it's all incremental. So maybe awareness grows and people start to read the label on a garment. Yes. Sorry? Oh, do they know they're being filmed? Good question. I suspect they sign a contract which gives away all manner of different rights.
In this case, I can say yes, they are aware that they were being filmed.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, it's true. Any effort you can make is going to help. I mean, I can't help, of course, it was on my mind because I live there, but the political phenomenon going on right now where the person that hated the hardest won. And I can't help but wonder if simply doing good is ever going to be enough again. You know, I suspect that it might not be. And so I suspect that one of the comments that came out this morning was about putting carbon back into the soil, and the point was if we put back in 0.5% of whatever, I can't remember, but if we do the right thing, then the world will be fine. But that relies on the assumption that everyone else will do the right thing as well, and of course they're not going to. So I can't help wondering whether, you know, I'd rather see a video of someone who had a dodgy factory, because that would cause more interest, and maybe we'd do something about that. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it really comes down to, you know, the three things that people always talk about, which is design, time, and price, right? So I don't know if you were referring earlier to Nike or Adidas, but Adidas had this shoe that just came out where they worked with this company that plastics from the ocean. And the shoe was just a really appealing shoe. Whether it was from the ocean or not, it appealed to consumers. sustainable processes to create design or create innovation, whether it's performance, then it will appeal to customers. But to tell a customer that buy this and pay more for it because it's from the ocean is not necessarily going to be enough. And if you look at food, which is maybe a precursor to apparel as well, people understood that impacts them. But until there was the early adopters did it because it was cool. It was cool to go to Whole Foods. It was cool to get this food. But the other people only got it when they really understood it, or it became more affordable for them. Where the prices, everyone was having organic food where you can find it in Walmart and you can find it everywhere. So it has to be some combination. You can't just say this is sustainable and pay more for it. You either make a good design and people will pay more for it because of the design, and then it can be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think fundamentally they're only going to want it if they want it. Being sustainable is not going to make them want it automatically. Yes. Do you have a question?
Well, I was curious because I was part of constructing a factory for IKEA, and I've been doing a lot of factory. And I think the thing is that if you take one product, you always find one decent factory, but then there is a whole lot of other factories that are pushed in prices. So I don't think it's a very good idea if the companies tell these stories. If it's NGOs telling these stories, then it might. But otherwise, we might spread an idea about what the world looks like.
Yeah.
That isn't.
I think it's always very encouraging when a company works with an NGO, especially if it's one that you can trust. Because when a company tells you their own CSR office reported on it, that's like saying a bloke down the pub told me. Yes?
I just want to ask, why does it really matter? I think I can talk about it.
It's for the recording.
So I guess my question is, why does it matter that customers believe in transparency? If we're an industry and we feel that this is the correct thing to do, that it's moving the industry forward with global supply chains, why does it matter for customers? So I just want to put that out there. I mean, why do we have to convince the customer?
Just do the right thing anyway. Julie.
To answer your question is there's not a retail business, there's not a fashion business unless there's customers buying. So in some way, if you're going to take the investment and initiative into these transparency or sustainability, somehow you have to get the customer driving that too. Because you, if you both are in sync with it, and I think that you have like really strong, impactful businesses. That's really where the breakdown is, because you have a whole industry in fashion, and you have a whole group of creative people that can't talk about it because they're afraid to, because it's not so cool. And that's where we are today. Hopefully that will change.
I'm from Industrial Global Union, and we push for transparency in the supply chain just because that's what the brands have to do, right? That's their obligation.
Yeah.
So for me, it doesn't matter if customers buy into it. It's what you've signed up to on your code of conduct. It's what you've signed up to as a global multinational. So, I mean, I think it's important that customers understand it, but I don't think it should drive why businesses or the fashion industry should embrace transparency. They should embrace it for other reasons besides our customers want this.
Okay, so we have got a lot of content coming up. I can see there are other questions, but do you mind if we sort of hold those till the next break in the conversations? Because I don't want to take up time which these two very, very smart women are going to need right now. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Rachel Arthur, who you saw a wonderful presentation from this morning. Rachel is going to introduce, she's going to tell you just a minute about what she does and herself to give you some context, and then she's got some marvelous things to share with us.
Sure.
Rachel.
I think I'm supposed to stand, right? I'll switch sides with you. Hi, everyone. So, yeah, you heard me speak this morning, obviously, about technology, and I was looking specifically at artificial intelligence. I'm a journalist by background. I've been covering kind of tech, fashion, business space for about 12 years, which is not that long in the scheme of this industry, but obviously is a massive amount of time in terms of fashion and technology actually existing together. And I spend the majority of my time now consulting with brands in this space in terms of how they can adopt technology, look at innovation, and especially work with startups in the space and beyond. So I've got quite a lot of content with me today, and I'm going to try and whiz through it in 15 minutes. I would suggest maybe for this bit, because I imagine that it will probably raise quite a few questions, that maybe we get to those when we do the panel in a little while. I am talking about virtual reality as well, so it's really interesting to hear some of your views. So I think my views are a little bit different on it. But anyway, the point is that you know, what I do is always looking at the future of the fashion industry through a multitude of lenses, primarily, as I said, about technology, and increasingly, obviously, that has very heavily led me into the sustainability space and really how we need to shift this industry in some way or another to reduce the damage that we're doing. Before I get to that, however, I kind of wanted to set it up by just looking a little bit at our view on innovation as an industry, and how often we completely forget that we are genuinely an innovative business, and we do ourselves a bit of a discredit by thinking that we're not. We say that technology and fashion don't go hand in hand all the time, and believe me, in so many ways that is absolutely true. But we know that fashion has been phenomenally slow with the uptake of all sorts of things, not least e-commerce, let alone everything else to do with digital and now tech in a much broader sense. But you will genuinely be surprised at the way that it's part and parcel of our lives in so many other ways. Just take next one, film, for instance. Technology is such a big part of our lives in terms of the ideas and the vision that's presented to us all the time. So obviously the self-lacing shoes from Back to the Future, which would you believe is 30 years ago? Clueless, the smart wardrobe. How many women in the room, men as well, perhaps wanted one of these for getting ready for school in the morning 20 years ago? The invisibility cloak, a massive idea of folklore, fairy tale, you name it, still a big part of film today, scientifically being explored. And of course, those gesture-controlled gloves in Minority Report. Now, those are just a handful of films, and of course, there are a multitude more. The Matrix, The Fifth Element, Terminator, more recently, Her. All of them presentations of a future that we are genuinely seeing technology working towards. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg scenario, of course. We think that technology companies work towards these visions because they've been presented rather than the other way around, but you could argue it both ways. And in fashion, we are constantly chasing this sort of newness too. All the time. It's often in a very frivolous and fun way. We talk about things like wearables and connected clothing on that sort of a basis. But genuinely, if Hollywood has got it right, then we are going to have clothes in the future and accessories that can do things like change shape, change color, communicate with one another and the world around them, and be so scientifically advanced that they can enable our bodies to do more and more wonderful things merely through the textiles themselves. But more than that, the point is that fabrics particularly have always been about progress, and we forget this. Innovation in fashion is, in fact, all around us. And I say this all the time, but all of you in this room are wearing wearable technology. So am I. And by that, I don't mean fitness trackers or smartwatches. I'm sure some of you have got those on as well. I genuinely mean your shirts, your tights, and even your bras. Let me explain why. The point is that textiles are technology. They've completely transformed our world. And I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but genuinely, we've gone from trading in ancient times all the way through the Industrial Revolution and beyond. When we think about hosiery, for instance, we forget the fact that nylon stockings came from innovation around polymers by DuPont just before the Second World War. Equally, we take for granted the fact that Lycra was only invented in the late 1950s. And who would have ever thought that you would put the word Marks and Spencer and innovation in the same sentence? But genuinely, that is a British retailer that was one of the first to set up its own research laboratory in 1934, no less, to pioneer new fabrics, which of course led to all sorts of easy care synthetics, not to mention machine washable wools. And then there's everything that's happened in the big sportswear brands, outdoor companies, and more, many of which were on the slide that Simon showed, in terms of all sorts of advanced performances. As for our bras, let me tell you one incredible story, and this is my absolute favorite. I'm sure some of you in this room already know it, and you particularly will if you've heard me speak, because I say it all the time. But in 1965, so a really long time ago, the industrial division of underwear manufacturer Playtex managed to convince NASA to let them enter a design into a closed competition for the Apollo spacesuit. Now, having been pushed out of the race at an earlier point of the competition for being indeed too frivolous a fashion company rather than an engineering one, or that's how it was perceived, they went on to win the contract by outperforming everyone else in just 6 short weeks. And they did so because they were praised for their couture-level sewing skills and the expertise of their seamstresses. The resulting suit was able to withstand the enormous demands of lunar exploration, being both flexible yet strong enough. And of course, they knew how to do that because they took learnings from how they made bras. And it was, as a result, a critical part of the astronauts' success. Some of the other examples that went through testing blew up on entry, so obviously that wasn't going to be a very viable solution. Playtex didn't. So let me tell you this, a company that makes bras sent man to the moon. So innovation is a really, really big part of who we are as an industry. And now we need to turn that to our planet and how we look after it and reduce the damage that our throwaway culture presents. This morning I mentioned artificial intelligence, as many of you would have seen. But this afternoon I wanted to really focus on how we start telling and verifying the stories within this, the transparency piece, which is of course why we're in this room. So these are the big 8 technologies that are key for the future. The 8 technologies that are shaping our world. All of them are very, very relevant to the future of our industry in a multitude of ways, from retail to supply chains. And I could talk on forever and ever about all of them. Obviously, I mentioned AI and robotics earlier. But in terms of sustainability and transparency, there are 2 areas that I'm following intently and I'm going to focus on today. VR for human empathy, which we've mentioned a little bit already, and blockchain for authenticity and immutable truth. Okay, so virtual reality first. Now, obviously, we've just seen a demonstration, but for those of you who aren't aware, it's really important to understand the difference between VR and AR. So VR, in this instance, is the idea of being a 3D digital world that looks nothing like the world you're in. So you put on a headset and you're completely transported to somewhere else. In this case, it was obviously to a factory. When you were in the other room, it was into a showroom where you were testing out the clothes, if anybody did that in the main room earlier. Augmented reality, by comparison, and as I said, it's important to understand the difference here, is a digital layer on top of your real world. So you'll all remember Pokemon Go taking off last summer. That's the easiest explanation of it. So you looked through your phone, you saw the real world, and you saw these digital characters on your phone as a result. So those are 2 quite different things. As I said, it's important to know the difference. For this, I'm going to talk about some stats that include both, but I am mainly looking at virtual reality in terms of that ability to transport somebody to a completely separate environment, real world or self-created. The point is, if you think this isn't relevant to you from the demonstration earlier, you really have to think again. The fact is, this is no small opportunity. It's hailed as the future of computing, and I, for one, genuinely believe this. Revenue is expected to reach from 80 billion to 182 billion just from VR and AR by 2025. But better than that, it's expected to be the next big computing platform after the smartphone. As you can see here, the development of where we've come from in terms of platforms, PC, internet, mobile, and we're now moving into this VR, AR, and MR world. If you want to understand MR, come and find me afterwards, because that's a little bit more complicated again. Wired says that these devices for VR and AR are going to be as ubiquitous as the smartphone down the line. Imagine that. So whilst we're thinking, is it not going to be important? Think how many of us have smartphones. Think how many of us have more than one smartphone. And then think about the idea of people all owning these VR devices as well. Kevin Kelly of Wired, same guy, says, VR in the short term is overhyped, but in the long run, it's completely underhyped. Over the next 20 years, it's going to have a really, really huge impact. And here you can see different stats for different markets. So my point of putting this in is to demonstrate to you that it isn't genuinely just about gaming. That takes up a massive amount of share, obviously, but there's all these other categories that it's going to impact. Retail's quite small, $1.6 billion, but that is still $1.6 billion. And importantly, Goldman Sachs say that retail is going to be one of the first industries that's going to be disrupted by this. And I think that's a really poignant suggestion. So here's an example of VR in action. Now, obviously, we've seen a 3D version of it, but so imagine that this is with a headset, so that child running comes behind you. This is the Displaced by the New York Times. So it's a virtual reality film which came with an accompanying app that puts viewers directly inside the global refugee crisis. Over 1 million subscribers received a complimentary Google Cardboard with their Sunday paper when this went out, and it enabled them to experience the devastation through the eyes of 3 different children in South Sudan, Ukraine, and Syria. The key is that it embraces and demonstrates a whole new world of immersive storytelling. It unlocks levels of empathy and excitement no other medium can do in the same way. And the key words there genuinely are storytelling and empathy. And the reason why is because storytelling and empathy are exactly what connects us to humanity when done well. So Chris Milk is the CEO of the VR company behind this New York Times campaign, a company called Within. And if you are interested in this space, I really, really highly recommend looking him up and watching his various TED Talks, because he is a phenomenal speaker. And he talks to the idea of virtual reality as an empathy machine. He says entering into this world is enabling the viewer to feel. And that's exactly what this experience does. We all think that we can visualize what the refugee crisis is because we've seen so much of it on the television over and over again. But this is next level. With this, you go in and it's real, and it feels real because of the fact you feel as though you're there. And it is an unbelievable feeling the first time you do it. Chris Milk said this is because VR is for the first time enabling us to go beyond the frame. If you think about everything that we watch at the moment, it's about a window. It's a box on YouTube, it's a box in our front rooms, or it's a box in the palm of our hands. Now we're stepping inside that box. We're stepping inside that frame, and we're entering into that world. And this idea really moves us into the role that technology is playing in experiences. As Kevin Kelly of Wired again said, the internet to date has been about information and knowledge, things that you can look up and see, observe, encounter, and know. With VR, we're moving into internet of experiences, where there are things that are felt, emotional, and shared. Experiences are going to be the new currency, he said. We will buy experiences, we will download them, and we will share them. He also genuinely believes that virtual reality is going to become the most social of all social medias, which, if you're interested, is one of the primary reasons for Facebook buying Oculus Rift so long ago. So the question with this then is, how can we apply this tech to our supply chain? Can we do things like let consumers feel and see the experience of where the products come from, as we just talked about? But also for me, how can we really look at that from an immersive storytelling perspective? I think hopefully when we come to the panel later, I've got some really strong views on the role that the media has to play in transparency and how they're not doing a very good job, and I say this as a journalist, particularly in this industry, at flagging a lot of this up, and I think that VR particularly can really, really help with all of that. So for me, this is a really interesting place to start in terms of transparency, but more importantly, and I really push you to remember this word, in terms of empathy. Okay, second technology, and this is a really, really big one, blockchain. Before I explain it, let me just start with this. The annual Edelman Trust Survey shows we are at a historical low for trust in institutions, from governments to banks to media, retailers, and more at present. That won't surprise any of you. As you can see here, only 15% of the global population feel the system they are living in works around the world. And in 2/3 of countries, only 50% of the population have trust in institutions. The ramifications for consumer spend off the back of such distrust is real, making brands and retailers just as susceptible as any other form of institution to this effect. So the other side of this discussion around conscious consumerism then is how to use technology to start reintegrating trust into systems, how to bring awareness from the storytelling side, how to tell the story of provenance, where things come from and how. This is about visibility in the supply chain, transparency, honesty, and authenticity. Born Digital Clothing is, of course, going to help with this. We're seeing a really, really big push into digitizing our clothing, adding RFID and other digital chips to things to give garments and other products a unique identity in the cloud. Businesses like Avery Dennison and Everything, both of who are here today, so I'm not going to say too much, so I know we're talking about it on the panel in just a moment. But these guys are looking to digitize 10 billion items of clothing over the next 3 years, and you can update those stats if I'm a little outdated on those now. But a lot of the focus from them so far has been on the consumer side of things in terms of what's been put out there, accessing experiences, digital wardrobes, and so forth. But they know there's a huge amount of potential there from the supply chain perspective too, to look back and see where items have come from, especially. At this point, we can really only go back as far as the manufacturer, however, pre-retail. So what about further in the supply chain? This is where the industry becomes increasingly complex, multi-layered, multi-outsourced, subcontracted, and so forth. Again, I know you all know this. For most businesses, we just don't know what happens before then. Transparency is a really, really, really hard thing to achieve. And this is where blockchain technology is trying to help. So what is it? In short, it's a record of assets or any other kind of content that is shared, replicated, and encrypted so it becomes a verified and immutable source of truth. Gartner also describes it as a type of distributed ledger in which value exchange transactions are sequentially grouped into blocks. What that essentially means is a new layer or even a new version of the internet. It's about being a really, really secure one. So one that removes all the vulnerability to errors, to fraud, and to misinterpretation. Now, this is not something that you go out and buy as a business per se. It's not a piece of software. As I said, it's an entire new layer to the internet that's being built currently. And it will become the norm for all types of transactions, from the exchange of money between two parties to documenting how goods move through a supply chain and the making of contractual agreements. The point is, the blocks that are created are distributed. They are not centrally controlled. So they cannot, under any circumstance, be modified. But they can be viewed, meaning there's a huge, huge benefit that lies in there in terms of the added trust and transparency that that brings. It's a layer of authentication and validation, if you will, something that absolutely cannot be tampered with. It was once about...
Like 2 more minutes.
Sure. Yes, it was once about cryptocurrencies alone, like Bitcoin, but it can now be applied to a multitude of different verticals. Now, it's okay to not fully understand this yet, and I know I've whizzed through the description and I need to go even faster now. You can ask me more afterwards, but truthfully, I'm still getting my head around it as well because it is incredibly complicated. But I've just got a couple of quick examples that I'll whiz through to just show you some of the ways it's already being applied. So this is a new version, a new instance of it, being applied to the supply chain. It comes from IBM. They've just announced a blockchain solution with Maersk. So what they're doing is managing and tracking the paper trail of shipping containers across the world by digitizing the supply chain process, for instance. This is because 90% of goods in global trade are carried by the ocean shipping industry each year. So the aim of this is to enhance transparency and secure sharing of information among trading partners. Another example is Everledger. This is a global digital registry for diamonds, again powered by the blockchain. And as Wired writes, Everledger uses more than 40 features, including color and clarity, to create a diamond's ID. Enshrined in the blockchain, this information becomes a certificate chronicling the jewel's ownership from mine to ring. Everledger has now digitized more than 1 million diamonds. They're also planning to move this on into an anti-counterfeit database as well. So beyond things like diamond, into other precious goods as well. They're doing so with wine first, but you can imagine it in broader luxury and eventually much wider fashion too. And of course, you can imagine the same applied to the textiles industry, tracking where things have come from, the authenticity and sustainability along the way. And this is something another company based in London called Provenance is particularly working on. As founder Jesse Baker told me recently, only 1% of the world's products are currently certified because it is so expensive to do so. When there are those certifications, how do we even then know that they are actually true? This is something blockchain, as well as things like DNA marking, are increasingly starting to help with. And with all of this, the point is there's a need for a more robust way to trust information today, especially as it goes through the supply chain, to make sure that we're not compromising anybody's health, the morals of the people making our products, nor the environment. All of which this technology can seriously and importantly, transparently contribute towards. So to end, that was a real whistle-stop tour. And believe me, there's a lot more to be said on all of it. But hopefully it gives you a very quick overview of the way that we are seeing technology seriously impact our industry in terms of verifying where things come from and how, and really enabling transparency all in that. And as The Guardian recently wrote, digital tools are increasing our knowledge of ourselves and the world, and thereby helping to realize the possibility of truly conscious consumption. So we need to push that a lot further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm intrigued by something that puts actual facts on the internet when we're living in this post-fact world. Thank you. We're now going to hear from Scilla Kruko, who's going to talk to us for a little while about behavioral something or other.
Designing behavior.
Designing behavior, okay. So we're going to talk for about half an hour or so, and then we're going to have a little break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to have a panel discussion, which is where we had to bring out all the questions about what you've heard from Rachel and what you're going to hear from Scilla. So, Scilla, over to you.
Thank you. So, my name is Scilla Kruko, and I'm a founder of a small behavioral design team that optimizes consumer journeys towards more sustainable decision-making. And I think I'm going to have my deck up. So first of all, I want to start out by saying that to me, sustainability has nothing to do with either transparency or technology. It has nothing to do with the lack of caring. I believe that every being on this planet actually cares if they have a place to live tomorrow. So to me, that is not the challenge that we're facing when we're looking at sustainability. What we're facing are everyday decision making, and that's where the problem lies, and that's where we should start solving this challenge as well. So in order to do that, we need to understand what drives human decision making and understand how do we influence that towards more sustainable decision making when you're shopping in a store, when you're shopping online, when you're producing a garment and so forth. So yes, and now my presentation is coming up. I think. Yes? Okay. Well, I can start without it. So basically, instead of starting the sustainability conversation, I'm focusing on how do we work with transparency, should we do it or should we not? I would rather say, let's start from the outside and work our way inwards and say, let's look at the consumers, the everyday decision making, and how do we alter that? Because basically, when working with human behavior and changing it towards more sustainable patterns, we need to make the right decisions, the easy ones. And that sounds very simple. But to do that, we need to understand what drives everyday decision making, and especially what limits everyday decision making towards more sustainable choices. And I'm hoping my deck is going to come up. It's on this one? It's coming? Okay. Well, I'm just going to keep on talking then, because it's coming. No? Yes. Yes. Okay. It looks different than... It's from the back. Can we start with the first one? Cool. So now you just saw it. And that's it. Okay, well, cool. So, first of all, we need to look at how do we make the right decisions, the easy ones. And in order to do that, we need to know what are the ambitions that we have on the behalf of the consumers. And most importantly, what are their ambitions? What do they want to be successful with? What kind of choices within sustainability do they wish to be better at making? And that should be your main target. Do they wish to wear organic clothes? Do they wish to do all these different things? And then that's going to be your parameter that you're going to base everything you do upon. So basically the trick is here to figure out how do we move from having all these different ambitions within sustainability onto creating measurable changes in human behavior on an everyday basis. Because as we heard earlier, we are facing a population of 10 billion people here. So if they don't make sustainable choices on an everyday basis, then we're pretty screwed. So to figure out how do we move from ambitions to actions, we often assume a lot of things. And that to me is where transparency and technology also comes in. Because we assume that if we provide people more knowledge about how is this a piece of fashion made, what's inside of it, then that's going to lead them to have a bigger knowledge base, they're going to be well educated, and that's going to help them make more sustainable everyday choices. We also assume that if we add different sets of technology, then that is going to motivate them towards interacting with our clothes, interacting with our services, liking and trusting our brands, and then that is going to lead to an everyday behavior change. But here's the thing. Motivation and trust follows behavior, not the other way around. And that's the misperception here that we need to address, the way I see it. And this is what we have to understand. So human decision making, and this is speaking very generally, is driven by two different systems. The reflective system, which is the light area up here, and the automatic system, which is the yellow area up here. So let me just explain to you what that means. Because reflective thinking is when we're processing knowledge, transparency, items and advices and all of these different things, and putting it into our brains, analyzing it, and then we're acting upon it. So reflective thinking is what we use on the 1st of January when we've been planning to go on a diet, and then the 1st of January we go out and we buy all these healthy foods and we start living this way for at least a week. So reflective thinking is conscious thinking, and it is one of the most important things that we as a human species have, because it allows us to figure out how to become sustainable, figure out how do we change the supply chain, how do we do all these different things. So reflective thinking is very important. Reflective thinking is what the people you saw in the beginning were using when they were explaining why transparency is important. But there is a downside to reflective thinking, and that is that it is very effortful. So our blood sugar is dropping every time we're being reflective. And that is why we cannot focus for more than 20 minutes at a time. If we're lucky, 45 minutes. So we're really pushing it right now. But so that is why we, by nature and by default, is set to be automatic thinkers 90% of the time. Automatic thinking and automatic decision making is unconscious. It's very effortless. And it is everything else that we do. It's everything we call habit. It's every time you move your leg, every time you take a sip of your water. So it's everything that does not require mental analysis. And the challenge is here that 90% of our behavior, because it's automatic, is not driven by motivation or knowledge, and therefore not transparency, not technology to begin with. So it is driven by our surroundings and how well or bad they play together with cognitive psychology, the human brain and nature. How well it plays with our instincts, for and against our instincts in the moment of choice. So when you're looking to implement sustainability on the consumer side, you first of all have to know their automatic behavioral patterns. Because when you ask people, like in the beginning, the movies we saw here, you're asking them to give a reflective explanation of what would trigger their automatic behaviors. We have no idea, because automatic behaviors are unconscious. So we are going to try to explain why we do what we do and what would help us change our behavior, but we have absolutely no idea. So you, as the people providing the choice architecture of the world that alters the 90% of human decision making, needs to start out by getting to know the automatic patterns of the consumers and what in our environments are triggering our everyday decision making. So, but let me get a bit closer to what I mean by that. Because we need to start focusing on what kind of a choice architecture do we have out there. And choice architecture is not just physical spaces. It is everything that meets our mind and our unconscious mind in the moment of choice. I have some examples for you. So what we're looking at when we're redesigning our choice architecture, which is the challenge that we're facing the way I see it, is we're looking for triggers and guides. And speaking very generally, there are two different triggers and guides in our existing environment that alters human decision making. So first of all, we have sort of very tangible visual ones that works with our senses, our sight, our hearing, our smell senses. So signs that can show you which direction to go in, what to choose, and so forth. But if that doesn't work, and that's where it actually becomes interesting, then we skip to more instinct-driven cues and guides. So if we cannot find a good solution at the moment of choice, then we start looking at other people. Because our pack mentality is one of the strongest instincts that we as a human pack have. Then we just follow what does everybody else do, and then we start doing that. So when you're looking at a consumer space, you have to start looking at what cues and guides and triggers out here are right now altering the wrong behavior. And how do we redesign that? Because of course, I I completely believe in technology and transparency as well, but to me that is not where the journey starts, because there are some very low-hanging fruits right now out there where we can redesign space management and so forth, which is going to help consumers make more sustainable choices right here and now. So let me show you some examples. And there are tons of different behavioral design principles that we work with, but I'm just going to introduce to you two today. So the first I'm going to introduce you to is giving visual directions and showing you how that influences human decision making. And then the last one today is framing. How do we use framing to implement better decision making on an everyday basis? But let me just show you what I mean by visual directions. So let me, if I can just get all of you to put up your finger like this. Cool. And then in a second, I'm going to change the slide. And you have to point in the direction the slide says. And you have to do it really fast. You ready? Cool. Keep your eyes up there. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. I see most of you going that way and some very few that way. Here's the thing. We can tell people how to make sustainable choices. We can help them see how these things are created and what would be the better choice for you. But in the end, what really ends up determining what we do on an everyday basis are the visual cues and guides in our environment. So 80% of the human species react intuitively and has an automatic behavior around visual cues. That means that we can know this is the sustainable choice, but when you're in the shopping situation, you just follow the visual cues. And what happens a lot of the times is we follow the visual cues, then the reflective thinking kicks in and says, wait a minute, there is something up here. We start analyzing, which requires mental energy, which is why we also jump back to being automatic instead and just follow the visual cue. Because it's easier, and we're set to preserve energy as a species. But let me show you an example on how you can use that in a sort of a more retail space. So this is a challenge that we worked with for a Danish retailer, where they had a lot of families as their client base, and they wanted to help them be successful. So they had been looking at what kind of ambitions do they have. And they wanted to be successful with providing healthy lunches for their kids. So lunch packs, dinners, and all kind of meals that were healthier. But somehow they ended up buying crisps, candy, all of these different things. So we zoomed in on the lunch pack situation, and that's the tricky thing. If you want to influence human behavior, you got to allow yourself to start somewhere, which also means you actually need to zoom in and focus, and you cannot do everything at once, which is sort of scary. But in this pilot, we looked at how do people shop when they're shopping for the lunch packs for kids. We are very big on lunch packs in Denmark. But so we looked at all the groceries that goes in a traditional Danish lunch pack. And what we found was that there were some triggers in that environment that did not help these parents succeed. Because all the signage surrounding these fridges with meat and all kind of Snickers and stuff like that would be surrounded by posters and signage actually priming you and showing people choosing the unhealthy thing. So that would be pictures of other families choosing the Snickers, choosing the sugary drink and so forth that would go in the lunch pack. So in this case, we were looking to increase the amount of healthy snacks going into lunch packs. And what we did was we redesigned that space that was surrounding the fridges with all the stuff that goes in a lunch pack. We moved from having all of these signs showing people to buy meaty products, sugary products, to showing, just changing the sign showing people buying carrots instead, buying baby cucumbers, buying all of these small baby tomatoes. And then we tested the interventions. And what we found was the amount of healthy snacks being sold went up by 83%, just by changing the in-store environment surrounding this decision making. So the last principle I'm going to introduce you to is framing. How do we deliver a message? And when it comes to sustainability, this is actually really important, because we have a tendency to assume that if we want to help people make sustainable choices, we should be communicating about this. We need to show how green our products are, or show them, in herbal packaging and, all these grainy-looking materials, and make it look really green and sustainable. That is not always the good thing here. So when it comes to sustainability, we have to sort of divide different agendas and say, one thing is that we as a brand want to communicate how green and how sustainable we are. That's one thing. But if we want to look at consumer behavior, that is not necessarily the right tool to use. And I'm going to show you why. So in this case, we were challenged by the Ministry of Health to improve public health in specific areas in Denmark where we had a population of very low-income people, and their health would be very poor as well. We were especially looking at their eating habits, because they had a tendency to eat a lot of fatty meats and sugary food rather than buying vegetables, which is also the more sustainable choice. So what we did, and what we always do, is mapping out the existing choice architecture, because we can sit at our own desk somewhere else, far away from the consumers, and assume that we know what's going to influence them, but we have absolutely no idea before getting out there. So we did a study on several supermarkets in this area, because 80% of our eating habits start in the supermarket or in the retail space. So what we end up buying out there is what is going to determine what we consume or wear at home. So what we found here was two things, basically. This was a long study, so there was a lot more, but I'm going to spare you from that. So in these areas, there was a tendency of people from urban settings coming in the summertime, because they would have summer houses in these areas. And in the summertime, the choice architecture of the retail space was looking in a very certain way. It had a lot of products with green packaging, talking about health, talking about sustainability, organic products, and so forth. But none of the locals would buy that, because they conceived it as something exotic, something for the outsiders that would come during the summertime, and also expensive. So they wouldn't touch it. On the other hand, in the wintertime, the choice architecture would change again, because then it was only local people, the tourists left. And by that time, there would be so much sugary food, so much unhealthy choices put in the front. And there were particularly some products being sold that we found really weird for a low-income area, which was a different type of products. But one of them, for example, was cherry cushions. I don't know if you have cherry cushions or know what that is, but we had no idea what it was before we did this study. So a cherry cushion is a cushion that has cherry seeds inside of it. Then you put it in the oven, it gets heated, and then you put it on sore muscles, which is a fine product, but they were selling a lot of them. And we were like, how many cherry cushions do you need? That's really weird. So what we did was, we started looking at the choice architecture surrounding the cherry cushions. And what we found was the cherry cushions were always placed in hotspots in the stores. And the store managers, they were like, well, we just place them in the hotspots, and then we add yellow stickers saying on sales or special offer or something. So we're like, okay, so that's the automatic behavior of these consumers. So rather than speaking to the reflective thinking, trying to convince them, you should be leading a healthier life, so please choose vegetables over meats, we just hacked into their automatic patterns. And what we did was, we took vegetables, traditional vegetables, and added yellow stickers. But yellow stickers without saying on sales, without talking about price, without even touching the price, adding yellow stickers and moved them to hotspots. So we changed the space management systems of these supermarkets. And what happened was, the amount of vegetables being sold went up by 45% and still going. So when looking at human behavior and when implementing sustainability, technology might be the solution, transparency might be the solution, but to me the important thing is how do we use it? And we have no idea, the way I see it, of how to use it, when to use it, before we start mapping behaviors out there. And we start figuring out what's actually going on. What are the main barriers out there that's keeping consumers from succeeding right now? Because that's where technology fits in. That's where transparency comes into place. And then I would also challenge that transparency does not necessarily has to do with showing people, you know, how was this piece of clothes made. Transparency can also be hacking into their biases and making it easy for them to choose the more sustainable product. But it doesn't necessarily mean we have to talk about sustainability and push that agenda into their face. So, with that said, I think transparency and technology plays a big role. But the trick is we should not do it just for the sake of doing it. We need to figure out how does it help people out there reach and activate their own ambitions. Because then that's going to come back to you as a increase in trust, increase in brand commitment, basically. Because motivation follows behavior and not the other way around. So, with that said, I would like to give the word to you, because it actually starts out there instead to me. So I would love to hear more about what are the biggest problems that you see right now within consumer behavior. Because all of these things that we've heard about today are very great and good, but we need to either realize that we don't know enough about the consumers, that we might not know enough about the barriers that's right now keeping them from choosing the right thing, which we think are the sustainable choices. And that starts with this question. So I'm interested to hear, do you have any thoughts on this? And there's one down there. Yeah? Mm. Cool. And can I just, how can you be more specific? Would it be to dress up famous people in sustainable fashion, or? Mm. 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 So it's actually by activating the pack mentality that we help the bigger crowd to move towards that. And I think that's a very good point, because the pack mentality is one of our basic drivers when it comes to everyday decision making. I would just really like to see it implemented a lot closer to the decision making, because I agree, when you see sort of mass communication and you get exposed to people who has sustainability values, but I just want to, it's still speaking to the reflective thinking, and we just have to make sure that we become motivated to change our behavior. That's very good and it's very important. But changing behavior is also really close to the decision making. It's on the website, it's in the retail space. So you would also have to figure out, how do we take that strategy and implement it on an everyday basis, very close to the decision making. But cool, thank you. I don't know who was first. You were first. Yeah. Mhm. Mm. 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 So an online environment is also choice architecture. So what I would do would be starting out by mapping the consumer behavior, looking at the sustainable perspective, and say, okay, well, what do we do right now? And that means we need to collect data on interactions, not ask people, what do you think you do? Because that's going to be reflective thinking, describing automatic patterns. We have no idea. So we have to backtrack it. And we have to also figure out what happens just before we go online and click on these products. Because that influences our decision making as well. And maybe that's a space that you cannot intervene in. But a lot of the times we can actually. So the first thing is to figure out what is actually going on. What are the current behaviors? What are the current sets of choice architecture? What is the layout of the website? How are wordings framed and so forth? And then the trick is to point out what are the 2 or 3 triggers that are right now influencing us to choose this product instead of the 100% organic one. And then you work agile, because you design a prototype, you test it. So it's very easy, not easy to do necessarily, but it plays very well into online services because it's very much like A/B testing. The trick is, and the hard thing is, to point out the right barriers. And we work with barriers within psychological barriers, physical barriers, and social barriers, because those are the most common ones that you meet in choice architecture. But starting with mapping the patterns right now is a lot of the times a process that we skip because we have all these surveys where people say, I like shopping online, but blah, 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 blah. But that also means we don't necessarily have a clue. And looking what happens just before. I think it was you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm. It depends on how the designers design it. So mm. 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 Yeah. Mm. Yeah, so I think the way I'm hearing it is I think there is definitely a job to be done internally in organizations and make sure that you get more space for designers who can design details and choice architecture, and you give more power and allocate resources for that. In order to, and then they need to be enabled as well, have methods and so forth to know how to work on the external side with the consumers. Did I understand it right? Mm. Yeah, definitely. Mm. No. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, now I get it. Mm. I completely agree. And it's also, I think, to me, because I have a background in design, not fashion at all or anything, but it's a matter of providing them with tools where they understand their role, that they are actually facilitators rather than creators of something beautiful. Because the important thing here is they actually hold the key to facilitate a behavior change when they design a piece of clothes. Because the design is also a piece of choice architecture out there that influences everyday decision making. So, yes, we need to enable designers to have tools for behavioral facilitation as well.
Okay, so one last question, and then we're going to break
Mm.
for coffee.
Yep.
Yeah, mine is a question. I mean, I think this is a fascinating panel thus far, both panel presentations. But my question is, consumer behavior, both of those words are big words that define a whole set of different actors who are motivated by different reasons. I think your
Yes.
presentation was interesting, but I wonder how that sort of reactive versus whatever the other one is, mine, interacts with the different types of consumers. Some are going to be values-based, low-cost, interested consumers. So how do we design architecture around a system that responds to the varying types of products that are offered across the
That's a very good question. So what we need to understand is all human beings on this planet are driven by these two systems. But how it plays out are very different. Because it depends on what environment you grew up in, what automatic behavioral patterns you have. So basically, automatic and reflective needs to be understood as the first time you were in a car driving. So you were very reflective, I was anyway, very slow, looking at everything, trying to analyze what do I do with my foot, where do I look, what does that dude say to me I'm going to do. And then it took me forever. But after a while, it became an automatic pattern. So now I can drive, I can even be on the phone, go on a red light, and I don't even notice. Because it's an automatic pattern for me now. So, but that was because I was taught to drive in that way. And we all have different automatic patterns. So what you normally do is you have your big ambition, which in this case is sustainability, which is huge. Then you need to first of all focus that ambition and be very, very specific and say, well, what is it, a specific line of garment that we're focusing on, or is it a specific in-store concept, or how do we focus this? And then the next thing is you need to do a cost-benefit analysis, figuring out which one of these has the most potential to have a positive impact on the environment, but also has the most potential to make a increase in revenue, basically. So it goes hand in hand. And then you zoom into that. Because by that time, you have already taken away some of the behavioral patterns, the ones that was related to other ambitions. But then you zoom into that focus, and then you do a behavioral mapping. And exactly what you said, you're going to find so many different behavioral patterns within that. So talking about, for example, online sales. There are going to be various behavioral patterns on that, and that is a initiative of discussion you need to have and figure out which one of these patterns do we want to address first, because it's not going to be one solution is going to work for all of them. So you have to figure out which one is right now creating the bigger challenge within sustainability. So which one should we address? Because you don't know to begin with. And the yellow stickers are not going to work in an urban setting or on other behavioral patterns, because we're influenced, if you come from an urban setting, you're influenced by others than other parameters, like the green labeling. I would go for that because I have a different automatic behavior. But it's not really relevant to talk to me because I'm already choosing a lot of the organic products. So it's also about defining, are you focusing on a mass market and what are the patterns within that? And then you have to limit some of them and just focus on the one that has the most potential to do. So the worst one, basically. I would find the worst one and see, okay, how do we implement sustainability here?
Okay, Celia, that was amazing. A round of applause, please.
Cool. Thank you.
So obviously we're a little bit behind. That's how these things go. Please go outside, get some oxygen, get some coffee. You've got 10 minutes, and we're going to be at like a hard start in 10 minutes. So please come right back. We have some really interesting conversations afterwards as well. All right, I think we're at critical mass now. So welcome back, everybody. Hope you're refreshed, invigorated, and ready for a punch-up. Do you know, we were just as a sort of reflection on the first part, we had a little chat with some people towards the end, and we were talking about Scylla's presentation and how it's great to know more effective ways of communicating with the consumer, but in some ways, that's not the problem. I mean, it's good to know better ways to communicate with the consumer, but the challenge we have is selling the right things to the consumer. Like it's great to learn how to do a more effective job, put yellow stars on it or whatever else it is, which is really good. But how are we going to persuade the world to put yellow stars on the right things we want to sell, not the wrong things? By the way, can someone open the curtains, please, so that we can have daylight? 'Cause it's a bit creepy otherwise. Okay. Keeps people awake, energized.
Yeah.
So we've got two more brilliant people on the panel, which they're going to now introduce themselves, and then I've got some fairly mundane questions, but I suspect you've got some very good questions. So we're going to hear from our two friends who have just joined us, and then you have questions, Twitter questions are going to come in, and I shall have some too, and we're going to have a fun and energetic debate. And when we go back and join our friends, we're going to say, what was yours like? And they're going to say, it was all right. And you'll be able to say, oh, we got really stuck in. It was a really good conversation. What?
Oh, really?
Come on then, chaps. Quickly, a minute and a half from each of you about what you do.
Yes, so good afternoon this time, everybody. So I had already the opportunity to briefly talk this morning. So I'm working for the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, so an industry organization representing approximately now 40% of the world textile and footwear industry, which is having virtually two main goals. One main goal is to give to the industry one common language, the Higg Index, upon which the industry can build on and measure in one single way social and environmental performance information all across the value chain, in factory, brand, and products for the environmental side. And also one second pillar, the one that I touched upon this morning and that we will be discussing at length just afterwards regarding transparency. And now virtually, so thinking once this information is gathered, how can that go public? How can that made available to consumers, citizens, governments, NGOs, anybody, any change maker around there that can leverage this information to actually build on impact?
Brilliant. Look at that. So just one thing I keep forgetting to tell you. The hashtag is Change Makers Lab. So anyone that's tweeting about it, they asked me to remind you, Change Makers Lab, or Change Makers Lab, as I facetiously mentioned.
I'll do it a bit shorter, but tips. So my name is Frederick Armbers. I work for Everything, IoT company. You just saw it on one of the slides, Rachel. Our goal is to give everything a digital identity, meaning a digital life. So for the apparel industry, that means all the garments that are out there, give it a unique identity. What that means is you can start interacting with that garment throughout the supply chain, for example, or in the store, or wherever you are. So I was very interested in what Scylla also said, like that consumer behavior. How can you change the way by interacting with your garment, for example? People nowadays expect some kind of experience, like an Uber, I want to have straight experience. Why can I not have that with my garment? So that's what we try to do, is together with SAC and Avery Dennison as our strategic partner, to start interacting with a garment.
Brilliant. So look, there's the title, Making Transparency Count for Consumers. And I think the question came up earlier on about should they have to care about transparency? If they just buy the right thing, if they buy things that are made responsibly or sustainably, why really should they be required to care about transparency? So does anyone want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I can maybe give a quick thing is that the idea is that even if they were not to care about transparency, the fact that the information anyway will be made available to the consumer in itself will be already a driver of change. That before the information can be made public, before the information can be actually made available to consumer in whatever system possible, that means that there will have been such an amount of work before that to actually understand the impact, understand the information, and to clean it in such a way that at the end the consumer can have access to an information that people can feel comfortable to share with. 3 years ago, I moved from France to Amsterdam, and I settled in downtown Amsterdam. And virtually, for many of you, I guess, have been to Amsterdam. Is one of the first things you actually see, and what you are surprised when you walk in the city is that you can see in everybody's house. That one of the first comments that you can make is that there is no curtain. that you see the living room, you see the kitchens of all of those people. And many of my friends and even myself, when I was walking down, the first time you think is that, am I looking at a store or actually at a house? Because everything is so clean, everything is so neat. And then after once, the more you live in Amsterdam and the more you walk, instead of walking with foreigners, you work with locals. And then you realize you're actually the only one looking, that Dutch people don't look into the house. But just because that the curtains are open, even if nobody looks into it, changes the behavior of the people that just open the window, because somebody may look into it. So therefore, the idea is really that just because you provide transparency, just because you make transparency available, and because you may allow just 1 out of 1,000 consumers to actually dig into your transparency information and to your sustainability performance, will make that this will actually drive for change, and that you will already change your behavior upstream to be able to deliver this information.
Do you know, it reminds me of something that sounds facetious, but it's not actually intended that way. You know how when you meet your partner and you think, this one will do, I'll change them? I mean, everyone, you don't necessarily think that overtly, but that is what you think. But you can't, because people can't really change. I mean, there's the argument about human nature that we can change a bit. But this, to me, is almost like, how can we make people care? How can we make them more empathetic about what's going on in the world? And personally, I don't think you can, particularly. I mean, if you make a couple of people care, that's nice. But I think if your noble goal to change the world through fashion is to make people care, then I don't see that as being a very realistic goal.
Can I comment on that?
Please do.
To me, the challenge is not getting people to care and to get consumers to ask for transparency as a concept. I don't think that's ever going to work in our, just imagine how busy an everyday life we have, and then adding, remember to ask for transparency in every second sentence. That's not going to happen. And to me, that's not real. I think transparency as a concept is a very good idea, and it's brilliant. But to me, the important thing is how and when, because it has to be relevant for the consumers, and it has to have a target. It has to say, because we want to create this measurable change in this direction, and then you measure, did we increase the sales of sustainable products or didn't we? And then that's going to lead back to, okay, so that was not the way to use transparency. Then we'll have to test another approach and do that. So to me, the transparency is not really, I truly believe that we all care, but we have busy lives, and we have lives filled with family and everything else that matters a lot more to us. But if you asked everybody on this planet, do you care about having a place to live and your kids being healthy and so forth, everybody would say, yes, of course I do care.
But care about their own kids and their own place to live, not
but
necessarily anyone else's.
But to me, that doesn't really matter. I don't care if it's money that drives it, if it's caring about your own kids or not. Behaviors can be altered regardless of what biases you have. You just have to figure out what are the biases in this moment, and how do we frame transparent information that makes it relevant to a certain group. And that's going to vary from which country you live in, what behavioral patterns you're looking at, is it online, offline, what's the how do you segment your target audiences and so forth. But to me, transparency and assuming that we need to push it because people don't care, that to me is not true.
I'm worried because I think that we're focused on being more good, and just more good, and that's great, except for it's not going to change people. And we've sadly seen that in the United States, the opposite triumphed. You know, it was more bad. It was pushing against something. It was about being not something. And so it strikes me that it might be we have to consider shaming the people who are not doing it. And rather than saying buy us because we're good, it could be don't buy them because they're bad. But it's a tragedy, but it's a reality as well.
Yeah, but it's an interesting view that I have is, what I've been hearing in the room is, people are like, okay, should we do it, should we not do it? But why you have the information, for example, the SAC information, you can provide that through the garment, even in the store. Just provide it. I mean, who would have thought that this application that you would send a photo and 5 seconds later the photo would have been gone, is now probably a big IPO and it's called Snapchat. Like, that was an application that was provided to a group of people. Who would have thought there was a demand for that? So I think it's very interesting. We have the information, provide that to your consumer, and act on it.
Yeah. There's a...
Just a comment. I think that one thing to also consider and enter into the dialogue is the right of the consumer to have the information, whether or not they look at it. The consumer is the one paying the money and feeding the system. So when I think about,
1930s when Consumer Reports started in the United States, right? You have a right to know that you're buying a quality product. I think that now in this day and age, the sustainability elements of a product factor into that quality. And so as a consumer, whether or not you immediately absorb the information, you still have a right to know it.
It reminds me actually of the warnings on cigarette packets. You know, there was none because it was healthy for you. In the 50s, smoking was healthy. And now it kills you, it says on the packet, and it shows you how you die. So you can't pretend not to know what the repercussions are of smoking. Yes, next to you.
I think that the idea that you can, I guess, maybe scan your clothing and get all the information about it is really interesting. But I think what consumers really want to know is they don't want to know who made it or how it was made or what's in it, but whether it's good or bad. Is product good or bad?
And so this is all really complex information that we're asking consumers to like look at all these different factors and sort of make a decision like, well, made sustainably but not necessarily ethically, but they just want to know good or bad.
Yeah. Yes, I would like to bounce back on this comment, is that in the last 4 years at the Coalition, we've been working with the European Commission, so there was little flags at the beginning that you were showing, in order to exactly do that. The exercise was about how do you provide to the consumers a very simple information to allow them within as little time as possible, in a way, to give them the information regarding environmental footprint. And so therefore what we've been doing is that after a couple of years of really digging into high technical elements about how do you capture all of the complexity of, and I will not go into details, but life cycle analysis, how do you analyze how many water, CO2, resource depletion, and many other factors, how do you combine all of those to make one simple information that you can give to consumers. So we did that with H&M, Inditex, Nike, Adidas, Stella McCartney, Gore-Tex, and the support of Salter Baxter. And at the end, we came by with, that may not sound the most innovative idea, but what we did is we just put a little label on the shoes that we wanted to test the consumer. We decided to, a bit in light with what you mentioned, to diminish as much as possible the effort the consumer will have to do. So we decided to put this sticker at the point of following the decision, the eyes of a consumer, so close to the price tag. And we decided to use a A to E label. Just something simple, having in mind that what we want to reduce is the effort that the consumer will have to do when they look at a label to understand, is it good or bad? So we decided just to take something and to try to test something that has been tested in electronics, in fridges, in houses, in cars, and whatever, where already they have kind of automatized the fact that A equals good for the environment and E equals bad for the environment. And actually the first output of that, and after having done more than nearly thousands of interviews of consumers and done this test on different countries all across Europe, one of the first thing, and one of the first comments actually that came out from that I can, if I sum up the sentence actually said by a consumer, is that I didn't know that my shoe had a footprint. So, because people are so much used, particularly in the textile sector, for instance, to understand they have vision of factories in Bangladesh, of a dyeing house, or things like that. But for shoe, they didn't, surprisingly, immediately associate shoe to somehow a manufacturing process. So first, they didn't know that there was that. So we realized that just by putting this simple information, good or bad, pushes them to understand that there is a impact before even thinking if it's a good or bad impact.
Rachel, you had something.
Yeah, I just think it's a really interesting time that we're in as well. And for me, it all just comes back to the word trust as opposed to just transparency. And if you think about what a brand means, a brand is about trust. It's a series of values that you associate with as an individual, as a consumer, and you wholeheartedly trust that brand. And I think that's eventually where I would like to see all of this going. So that, yes, it's really important to have those kind of labels and that clear understanding for a consumer. But ultimately, and I look at food as the simplest way. You know, if you're using something like blockchain, for instance, to verify where a certain fish has come from, it's sustainably sourced, blah, 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 and it's in the restaurant that you're in or it's in the supermarket that you're buying from. At this point in time, maybe it is a consumer thing that they need to look at that and validate it themselves to know. But down the line, you should have 100% trust in that restaurant because you're going to a good establishment to know that they've already done that sourcing, so that that piece is kind of taken away from you because the trust is just in the establishment that you're with. And I think all of this comes down to the fact that there isn't much trust at all in society at the moment. You know, hence all of the issues that you're talking about. I've got a massive piece with the media that I mentioned earlier, and obviously all of this as well. well. And it's a bit of a minefield because there's obviously so much going on. But I think if we can look beyond that and get it, embed it actually in the brand and the systems that we have, then we have the ability to get to a really different place with transparency down the line.
Yeah, I think if you look at transparency as a gesture on behalf of the brand in order to continue to build brand trust, then it makes a lot of sense. You sort of say, well, of course they are X brand, so of course they do this.
Which is why there's such uproar when it's exposed that it's the opposite, and you have to boycotting whatever, because you have had that trust in a brand and suddenly it's been taken away from you.
Yeah.
And so I do agree with what you said, that there is an element of needing to show up companies that aren't right, and that's where I think the media, especially in this industry, does not do a good enough job.
They don't do any analysis. They make sweeping generalizations.
It's not just that they don't do analysis, but it's also the fact that they are completely accountable to their advertisers. So that there are no fashion journalists in this industry that will call out the brands that are not doing a good thing.
We're being live streamed right now.
But it's true. I'm not afraid to say it. I am a journalist. It's true. There isn't, and I think that's a really, really bad thing.
There are one or two, but I think you're absolutely right. I think your point is very well made. And that's why I was struck by the thing I mentioned earlier about Starbucks supporting same-sex marriage. That was something that they stood for, which I went and bought a Starbucks coffee as a result of it. I don't trust them as a brand anymore, but I feel much better about them. And maybe being transparent in your labeling is another little gesture towards encouraging people to support the brand. Scylla.
I just think we need to be very clear of, do we wish to change behavior on a broader scale, or do we wish to communicate about sustainability and be transparent? Because a lot of these initiatives are very awesome and everything, but they only speak to people who are already biased for sustainable choices, which is ourselves. And I just want to say that's not what's going to trigger a lot of the mass markets out there.
Yeah.
And we should rather be demanding good choice architecture. And good choice architecture does not necessarily mean showing people how it is made or what sustainable footprints it has, because that can actually have the opposite effect out there. So I would, as a consumer, demand that I am provided with better choice architecture that makes it easy for me to choose the more sustainable products. Because especially when it comes to fashion, when I go suit shopping, I am not going to choose my suit based on if it's organic or not. I want the one that makes my ass look good or something. So, and that is what drives decision making on different patterns, on different trends, and all these different things. So I would hack into that and figure out what triggers these behavioral patterns. Are we talking about suit shoppers, or are we talking about sock shoppers? Because they're going to use different sets of choice architecture to navigate in that. And right now we're all assuming that the conversation about sustainability is going to interest them, which I am pretty sure that's not. Even though I work within the sustainability field, that is not how I shop my clothes at all.
Does anyone think that the general public will buy something because it's sustainable, pay a bit more for it?
Not American.
Yeah, you do. And any particular region of the world?
I think a lot of, I'm not really sure, but I think a lot of the young consumers today are very conscious, and they actually look for brands or products that are made in a sustainable way. I mean, if I go to the grocery store with my daughter, who's a little over 20, and there are no ecological eggs in the store, she says, okay, let's change the menu. And she does the same when she buys clothes and whatever.
I think that's what's interesting. It's not buying something as opposed to
Right.
because it's not, as opposed to buying it because it is. I think that's where we're still at the moment.
Yes. Sorry. You can go next. You.
I don't think people buy because sustainability a red herring, if you like. But people do buy sustainable things. In fact, businesses that put in environmental and social purpose, whatever you call it, and of course it's different, at their heart are showing incredible returns. Tesla's now the second most valuable car firm in the world, only next to GM. They haven't done it by, they have promoted sustainability, but more, they promoted their insane mode and the fact that it's an incredible thing to drive. health, wealth, happiness, your various different motivations. So I think as practitioners and as marketeers, and there's lots we can hack into with advertising as well. I guess we need to map behaviours. There's lots of shortcuts we can take from advertising and communication of normal things. But there's one thing which kind of is going to go against everything I was about to say as well, which is I sit on the global team of Fashion Revolution, which, as many of you know, calls for transparency every week and around Plaza Week. And hundreds and millions of people, but okay, this is still nowhere near the entire mainstream, but hundreds of millions of people every year get involved asking brands who make their clothes. So there's something there as well. People do want to be engaged. People are angry or inspired or whatever the different. So I'm not quite sure how we put those two things together, but there's something in both of those which I think we haven't quite worked out what's going on yet.
Yeah, sorry, Julie, and then the lady next to you.
Just to Rachel's thing, the transparency, I think that I feel like it's in the media that needs to start speaking out about the transparency of things they know. It's very so tied to advertising in the past, and that's been going by the wayside in a sense. But it's for sustainability and fashion, I think that people are more apt to not buy something because they're saying that they don't know. So that they all of a sudden know, that's a driver. And if the sustainability, if you're going to buy something for sustainability, it's got to have all the other things too, plastic, fashion, GLOs. But that's a big, big, big game changer.
Yeah, and let's not forget how much influence the media can have, ultimately. Good and bad, but certainly in terms of making those decisions and those choices, and I'm sure you have a big opinion on that, but to me, I think there is a really big gap in terms of helping with the awareness piece, and agreed, there are obviously a lot of journalists that do look at this in a much broader sense, but I think if we're talking pure fashion press, when we're actually looking at people that write about clothes and what looks nice and what to wear, this is not talked about at all. There's a massive gap. And don't get me wrong, there are obviously individual publications that do, but on a large national scale, there's a really big gap in the media, I think. And I think it's a real shame because there should be people talking about it. Yeah.
Yes.
Just to build on what Julie and also Lucy have been saying, I'm Elisa from DSR, and with Futera, we've actually been testing sustainability messaging with 5 mainstream brands over the last 18 months, and that study is about to be released in a few weeks if we're lucky. Futera continues working on it at the moment, and some interesting things, so first of all, we see that sustainability does not drive the purchase intent or that act of purchasing, but consumers are interested in sustainability, and one really interesting thing is that it actually improves brand reputation and how consumers feel about the brand. So disassociating the actual purchase intent or act body and practice from the feelings and the reputation is sort of one lens that's useful to analyze how consumers are.
Yeah.
Mine's more of a comment, and I'd love to hear the panelists' reactions to it. I think many of these are premised around this idea of we're all searching for the next big idea. Even the futurist today who spoke about uncovering the leaves. I mean, I wonder if there's a disservice that we're doing to the myriad efforts that are trying to improve the many conditions in supply chains of apparel. For instance, the work of SAC, the work of, I forget the organizations.
Everything.
Everything.
It's easy.
And whether or not there is a potential for us to kind of always chase the new and not build collaborative efforts, which are, I think, critical in driving reforms here. So, you mentioned the media, right? But then we also talked about consumer preferences. And in a way, it almost sounds like one of these things is going to be the answer. But is there not sort of a collaborative approach here whereby brands sit with standards makers, who sit with media companies, who sit with, and we all kind of work on this, because systemic change in the industry will only, in my opinion, come from systemic action, system-wide reform. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's only going to change when, as I mentioned earlier, when H&M get together with Inditex and with LVMH and Nike and Adidas, and they all sit around the table and say, right, these are our rules. This is what we're going to do, and they stick to it, and then everyone on the outside is on the outside. And then between them, they could spend 0.01% of their advertising budget and create a global campaign, and they could change the entire paradigm. So, this is a wonderful event for H&M, and no one else is doing it. So, respect to H&M for doing it. It's not really going to change anything. It's like a CSR office in Primark.
Do they have one?
Can I?
Yeah, I'm sure they do, yeah.
Can I just quickly?
Please, yes.
Just to answer briefly, this time I will refer than the other time. So it's exactly also what's happening right now, that we have actually meetings where the marketing team of H&M talks with the marketing team of Inditex, with the marketing team of Nike and Adidas to actually build up this approach that we have to take while we're engaging the public, let's say, regarding social and environmental performance. So this is happening definitely, and this is, completely agree with you, a key factor to actually be successful there. And more importantly, not only them, and as we are doing tomorrow and the days after, and also that will be carried on in another event in Boras in a couple of days, actually in 2 days. It's also with having all of the stakeholders that come into play, all of the NGOs, unions, other initiatives, that we will be able to make that, and indeed the media, coming back to it, to make sure that it's a common effort towards transparency, because at the end you talk to the same person. So we have to narrow down the message to make sure that the message has an impact at the end.
Yeah. Maybe to add to that, we actually work with the SAC, so we actually integrate it into their platform. So all your products out there can have SAC data. So if you, for example, scan it with let's say a QR code or whatever kind of trigger, you can present that information already to the consumer. So we have integrated, so coming back to you, we already working together on what is the next step, what can you do, and help you guys explain that story, your sustainability story, but actually have a foundational facts coming from the SAC based on that.
So yeah, I just want to add to that I completely agree. There are the way I see it, three very important legs. There is policy making, regulation, there's industry standards, and then you have the whole consumer side of it as well. And there is no right or wrong place to start, because everything has to go together. I just think it's very important that when we look on the consumer side, it's not necessarily a matter of providing more information. It's a matter of getting a different tool on how do we alter behaviors that are there right now, and that can be changed very fast and very immediate and very impactful.
I have to wonder whether there isn't the sad reality that we need to build this coalition to do the right thing and then shame the people outside it. There needs to be some negative connotation with buying something that's not part of it. Sorry?
You just want to shame someone.
I want someone to blame.
Yeah.
No, but you can't. There's a positivity in hate. I don't think you can be really passionate about something if you're not passionately against something else. You can't be ambivalent about everything and you just love one thing. Yes.
Okay, so because you're saying what you're saying, and we should say that fashion can be an expression of love for something. And I think that in this coalition, I think it's important to bring back art and culture and designers. And maybe in a few weeks you can express more positive things about the planet. But I think it's important to see fashion as it's not just a bad thing or things you can change. I mean, you can express.
I think fashion's one of the most glorious things. It's like the second biggest industry in the world. It keeps hundreds of millions of people eating and feeling good about themselves. I think it's the most amazing thing.
I'm just saying that fashion can be, for example, for young people, an opportunity to express their relationship to the planet, what they want to have, the relationship they want to have to nature and the planet. And I think that companies like H&M have an opportunity. Not all companies, but I think some companies have an opportunity to make something out of that.
Yeah, sure, certainly. Yes, at the back.
There's one point I would like to make with the choice architecture and transparency. What we found out is that there is a difference between customers coming into a store and buying a product and getting the customer to come to the store. Which is a completely different thing. Once they're in the store, you can of course use the choice architecture, which makes sense. Everybody uses that. But what we learned is that transparency influences your brand reputation, and it's through the brand reputation that choose for your brand, and they will come. And so having like the label is all about being open and honest. This open and honesty leads to this transparency leads to open and honesty, and it's an open and
Can I just ask, how many people in the room are under 25? So honestly, it doesn't matter what any of us think. It's tragic, really. But you know the good news, though? This is just a little one-line anecdote. When I started at Parsons, I was there for 7 years as the dean, and we had a little bit of sustainability. And by the time I left, you had to study it or you couldn't graduate in every course in the entire school. So 5,000 students studying design, architecture, ceramics, every kind of design, and they're required to study sustainability. And not because we necessarily thought they should. I mean, we did think they should, but because they demanded it. And many of them work all the way through. So in some ways, it's okay. You know, we've messed it up, but they'll come and fix it. Yes?
I think when we're talking about choice architecture, we've neglected to talk about how policy shapes choice architecture on a grand scale. So, for example,
I think everyone on the planet knows that water bottles are bad for the environment, and yet the consumption of water bottles has continued to go up every year except for the recession. That's a very simple, transparent argument. Water bottles are bad for the environment, and yet we have not made, conscious consumerism has not brought down their consumption. So this whole conversation about whether or not we can make consumers care is based on the premise that making consumers care will address this problem of sustainability in fashion, when the choice architecture, which is among water bottles, the fact that you can't find water fountains anymore, that when you walk into a store you're presented with a water bottle instead of a free cup of water, is what's driving water bottle consumption. So my question is, what policy is on the table that will drive sustainable fashion forward? Is there policy on the table right now that will drive sustainable fashion forward?
But I can tell you that, first of all, I completely agree with you, and it has to come down to those sort of much bigger changes. And a really, really simple example in the UK, which I'm sure loads of people here are from and know, is just the fact that they started charging 5 pence for every plastic bag that you buy. And the change has been absolutely phenomenal. I don't know the numbers because I'm terrible at remembering statistics in my head, but you know, millions and millions of fewer bags used. And of the 5p's that are spent on those bags, all of that then goes to charity. And it's been a phenomenal shift in the market to see that happen. It's only been in for about 2 years, so it's brand new. But it's amazing how just making it actually affect the consumer directly. I mean, who wants to spend 5p when you're doing your shopping? You know, it's not actually that much money, but it's enough to make you take your plastic bags with you. And so, yeah, for me, I completely agree with you. It's just about having those sort of implementations across the board. And obviously that really came down to collaboration because it had to be all of the supermarkets involved to make it happen.
That's where I think we've got no chance if we look to government for legislation, because that's not the game they're in. But when I look at what should be happening, and I think it's all down to the corporations. And, you know, sadly, I was in an H&M recently, and I was looking around, and I saw the collection box for recycling, which is brilliant. Nobody knows about it, but it's brilliant that it's there. But it was probably a 10,000 square foot store, or maybe 20,000 square foot store with one box by the register. And, you know, just to stand there and look at the scale of this product that was going out, and then look at this, you know, it's like, if we're serious about it, if we're serious about recycling, then we need to do a lot more than that. You know, and H&M are doing something, Marks and Spencer's are doing something, most stores are not doing anything and couldn't care less about it, they just want to sell more stuff. So to me, it's not about the government, it's not really about legislation, it's about this cabinet of people that are going to get together and are going to make a decision and say, right, this is what we're going to do. Yes?
I'm from Sweden, so you know we are a bit full of ourselves. I want to ask the youngsters here. I was part of a study that we did for a Coca-Cola company on the youngsters, how they look at sustainability. And if you look at all the numbers, they say like, oh, sustainability is not what we want. And then we cross-reference that on how they purchase food and groceries in supermarkets. And of course they were not 40% below, above, but 40% below. But rather than, I mean, in Sweden we say you have to do it for the right reasons, which is completely BS, but still, we are a bit of a moral society. And sometimes I feel that we talk about youngsters, we talk about sustainability, we have this moral sentiment going on. We have to do it for the right reasons. I think that the number one reason why they will not buy it is because the prices were too high on organic food stuff. So I think sometimes this discussion gets stuck in that. So how can we make them understand it? I don't care if they understand it, just get them to buy it. And in that perspective, I think that what we're seeing today with H&M is fantastic. So yes, it's really cheap clothes, it's sustainable. Okay. I'm not trying to push that very Swedish thing, but you have to do it in the right reasons. Because we have a system.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so just a very short interaction, just to bounce back on those two things. When we did our study on the product environmental footprint, we a bit also collaborate that, virtually meaning that the young consumers were the one having the highest ambition, but they were the one, unfortunately, assuming that a high environmental performance would equal a higher price, and therefore they would say, I cannot afford it yet, because I'm too young and I don't have yet the buying power for that. So we will realize that at the end, unfortunately, no judgment here, that at the end, ultimately, it was virtually the older shopper that would be more interested in this concept because they will think they can afford to buy more environmentally friendly. And in terms of policymaker, just to come back quickly on that, is that if there is a driving force that has emerged in the last years, also particularly in the field of environment, in the field of sustainability and transparency, that will be the governments. So let's say that in the last 3 or 4 years, we have seen the emergence of many different national initiatives. May that be in Germany, may that be in Netherlands. We have also seen the emergence of a European, the EU government initiative, different forces now, discussions which are happening in the European Parliament around how to drive the textile industry more sustainable, or virtually, to make it short, all of that happening because of the Rena Plaza. And that means that now there is really here, if we had had such a conversation 5 years ago, it's very likely that we will not have talked at all about government's influence into it, while now what we see is that there is a lot of government influence to it, so far in a voluntary basis, really trying to push and to accelerate the move that the industry is doing towards already a voluntary scheme towards transparency, but potentially at some point in time to jump in a more straighter way to push for that.
So I think this conversation is really important, but what makes it useful is if we have takeaways from it. So I'm really interested in what you've all heard today. Has anyone got anything that they've actually learned that they're going to take away and think about? Because, I mean, to start off, I think the behavioral science thing was really fascinating. You know, and I think that if we have the ability, if a store has the ability to sell you red or blue, and they can choose which one you're going to buy, then, and one of them's sustainable and one of them's not, why the hell are they not selling you the sustainable one? Why have they made a conscious decision to sell you the non-sustainable one? Because that's what they've done. So I'm fascinated by that. Who else has got things they've heard today or points they want to make that they want us all to take away with us? Yes?
To Google blockchain because I barely understood what that was about. But secondly, I mean, I think it was a really fascinating set of presentations. There's this, I think both the presentations on sort of the customer and what it means and how to motivate that, plus the technology lens was really fascinating. I mean, this discussion about how to promote transparency and also worker sort of human rights conditions in supply chains. So I think that we have to unpack a ton more, but I'd be eager to see that conversation follow up in future sessions around what we're learning from applying these technologies and from experimenting with consumers more, because that was something I'd never heard. I'm so grateful for that.
Yes. Back.
So the one thing that resonated with me was around the media piece. I think there's a huge highlight the positive work that's happening in this space, because a lot of work that's happened it's been sort of brands tooting their own horns, and a lot of time that's not really taken seriously. And when a third party calls out what good looks like in this industry, I think it has a lot of merit and it has a lot of credibility. So that's one thing that resonated. The other thing that is what this gentleman said about the systems approach and the collaboration. SAC is fabulous in terms of bringing key brands together. I think that we have an opportunity to really challenge ourselves as members of SAC to say, what can we do as groups of brands to set a goal for 2018, set a goal for 2019, and say, you know, let's come together as a group of 20 brands or 30 brands to call an action for the rest of the SAC brands to collaborate with us, to, you know, disclose tier 1 and tier 2 strategic suppliers. Because that's something that could easily be done, even with the small and medium-sized enterprises. I think the tools that SAC makes available are really valuable. So there are some really tangible things that we can do. I love the debate, but I think that there's a lot of opportunities for us to start doing.
Can I just add as well on the media piece? One thing we haven't really talked about, and I I'm a really firm believer that I think the messaging from a brand perspective needs to shift as well. I think what's out there at the moment from a consumer point of view is really, really confusing. You said, does Primark have that team? They do. It's massive. They have an enormous sustainability team, and they're doing some incredible work. But the fact that you're in the industry, other people here in the industry don't know that is a really, really big problem that they know that they've got to deal with. And the consumer, I know people at Primark who literally have had other people at the dinner table get up and leave when they said that that's who they work for, because they perceive it to be such a negative brand. That's not okay. So something around their messaging really has to shift in order to make it much clearer what they're doing. And I think H&M also falls into that bucket. The idea that there are these recycling bins in the store, first of all, there needs to be awareness around them. But second of all, it is very confusing, the idea that I recycle something, but then I get money off and then I spend more. So I'm actually just feeding that same thing. And don't get me wrong, I think it's a brilliant thing, but I do think it's also very, very confusing for the consumer. So I think there needs to be a lot of work done around messaging and how to just bring some sort of clarity to this whole transparency piece for them as well.
Agreed. And the messaging, what I'm suggesting is that it's different when it comes from the brand.
Yes, yeah.
It's considered greenwashing, right? When it comes from a credible source, then it starts highlighting what's really good. And I think the industry needs to start, or through the media, needs to start really highlighting what really good looks like. And right now, we haven't really done that.
Well, I think that, the tragedy is, right, H&M are great because they've arranged this, and this is really good. This is great. And, other people are not doing it. And I suspect most big brands throw parties 10 times the size of this once a month around the world. And their budget for throwing parties is probably 100 times whatever the budget is they dedicate to a noble thing like this. So that tells you where their priorities are. And I'm not, clearly I'm not criticizing H&M because that would be foolish. But because we're here having this conversation because H&M are smart enough and good enough to want us to have this conversation, which is great. No one else is doing it. So, full credit. But it does also tell you the scale of commitment. It just does. If you have a $100 million advertising budget and you spend, and then ask yourself how much you spend on advertising sustainability. And that tells you where the company is on sustainability. It's a simple equation. So please, someone think of something positive to end this conversation. Yes.
I think there's something interesting in this question about making transparency count for consumers, and I think there's a very interesting in businesses starting to become more accountable for and to their consumers. And it strikes me there's no answers right now because everyone's spinning their way. And it puts me in mind of, I can remember back when the idea that you take accountability to your suppliers was insane. It was anathema. It was, these are separate businesses and we do not go beyond our factory gates. And how dare you suggest that I should tell someone else how to do business? Now we're well versed, H&M and others are publishing tier 1 and tier 2 factory lists, brilliant. And I think there's something in, obviously the goals that we're seeing from H&M and Unilever and others, many, many others, taking account of circularity and climate positive means that the behaviour of consumers in the value chain is starting to be taken seriously. And I think at the moment it's a bit vague, as it has to be, because no one really knows, but I think that's what we're moving to, is actually true accountability for consumers. I feel I'm very excited about it.
Very good. So we're hopelessly out of time. I just want to ask the panel if there's one small closing statement that each of them have that they want to offer up. Yes.
I have one. So I think it's very important because this whole discussion just highlights the complexity of this challenge. And I think it's very important to remember that there are two ways of changing behaviors. There is sort of the long-term, the uphill way of doing it, which is very important because it's changing cultures and paving the way for a sort of long-term development and behavior change, which is where you're activating the reflective thinking. So communicating, using the press, doing events like this, and because what it does is it creates a common ground, common understanding on a long-term behavior change. But there are just some instant things that we can do here and now as well. And that's when we start working with the automatic behavior and do all of that. So I think it's important to remember that all of it has to become together. It's just different strategies that we use. And as the lady down here says, we just have to figure out right now what do we use for when and what's the purpose of what we're doing.
Frederick?
Well, hearing this whole room, and like, it's such an interesting for me, coming out of a within a technology company, you own the product, and you own that whole life cycle till it's bought by the consumer. Why can you not get more out of it by providing that data, that extra transparency throughout the whole life cycle, with the blockchain, for example? And what we can provide as everybody in the room, we can even provide that information to help the consumer by getting them back into the store, for example, and help them change that behavior. So what I've learned, again, is that why are we not controlling that more product life cycle with the amount of data that we have, for example, with the SAC, and provide that to the consumer? So that's, again, an eye-opener for me.
Baptiste?
Yeah, very shortly, that at least in the discussion and the question also that arise, that one sure that virtually I have the impression all of the room agrees is that anyway we can be sure that there is still a question about how to make transparency count for consumer, but we are very clear that transparency will count for impact, and that transparency will definitely drive somehow sustainability. May that be because there is a halo effect, and that actually is that the brand that benefit of transparency made at whatever level possible, but that ultimately transparency will have a positive impact toward our sustainability goals.
Rachel?
I think my biggest takeaway really has been around that word collaboration and just how important it is in every sense, everybody in this room, but the industry at large, and how really change only happens by working with other people. And that ultimately all of this just comes down to trust. And I, for one, obviously genuinely believe that the blockchain is going to play a massive part in that. So do go away and Google it because it's very complicated. You don't need to understand it fully, but trust me, it's going to be a really, really important part of things down the line.
Well, I would like to congratulate H&M on doing this event, because other companies are not doing it. And to know, when they asked me to do this, I said, you know, I'm only going to say what I think. I'm not going to say nice things if you know, and they said, that's fine. That's why we asked you. So I really admire a company that will invite people in knowing that they're going to end up getting some criticism. So full credit to H&M for this. I think if more companies behave the way that H&M do, then I think we would have a very different landscape. So whatever we can do to encourage that to happen, and keep holding H&M's feet to the fire to make sure they deliver up to what they say they want to do, which I'm sure they're fine with. But generally, I really want to thank H&M for making this happen, and I want to thank this amazing panel. So that's the end of it today.